The U.S. private prison market is not fragmented. CoreCivic and GEO Group dominate it. Their market capitalizations as of early 2025 were $2.4 billion and $4 billion respectively. The next tier, management and training corporations, Serco, Sodexo, are either privately held or subsidiaries of foreign conglomerates using corrections management as one revenue line among many. The top 5 players account for approximately 45% of global private prison revenue. There is no accessible mid-market niche populated by scrappy regional operators on the verge of going public. This business concentrates at scale and does not make room. The cheapest entry is a management contract. You incorporate a corrections management company, hire former wardens and state corrections officials, and bid on government RFPs to manage facilities the government already owns. You are not touching the building. You staff it, run the programs, issue the incident reports, and manage the liability. Estimated startup capital at this level: $3 to $5 million in insurance premiums, compliance infrastructure, legal fees, and the cost of assembling a management team credible enough to survive procurement review. FI. Startup estimate, you then generate revenue at whatever per diem management rate you negotiate on occupied beds you don't own, under a contract that renews at the government's discretion. You are a thin margin service business with one customer, who is also your regulator. The next level requires operating a physical facility. Nobody enters private prison operations by building new. At South Dakota pricing, $825 million for a 500-bed men's prison. As reported in November 2024, a 500-bed facility would cost roughly $275 million to construct from scratch, before land acquisition, before accreditation, before working capital. That math does not work. The realistic entry at this tier is acquiring or leasing an existing facility, often one sitting idle that a jurisdiction wants to monetize. Specific acquisition prices at this scale are not documented in recent public transactions. FI. Small facility acquisition cost at the regional operator level: 2,000 to 5,000 beds, multiple facilities, multiple contracts. The closest public reference point is GEO Group's 2010 acquisition of Cornell Companies. Cornell operated facilities including Walnut Grove Youth Correctional Facility in Mississippi and generated revenues in the range of $200 million annually. The acquisition was structured at a significant premium to that revenue figure. No comparable transaction between U.S.-focused private prison companies has occurred since. The market has not produced a mid-tier seller. At institutional scale, you are buying into the duopoly. GEO Group's $4 billion market cap, or CoreCivic's $2.4 billion, buys you the operational infrastructure, the contract relationships, and the government positioning that generated $254 million and $116.5 million in net profits, respectively, in 2025. To illustrate what that infrastructure looks like in motion, GEO Group secured approximately $520 million in new or expanded ICE contracts in 2025 on an annualized basis, the largest single-year contract intake in the company's history, covering roughly 6 new detention beds. That is what scale looks like when political conditions are maximally favorable. That is also what you are paying for when the market cap reflects it. The regulatory process for a new entrant is not a single licensing exam. It is a distributed approval requirement spread across multiple agencies with no unified timeline and no single point of entry. At the federal level, Bureau of Prisons contracts operate under the Federal Acquisition Regulation and DOJ Acquisition Regulations. All privatized corrections contracts above $1 million in value are classified as high-risk procurements and subjected to additional review layers. The bidding timeline from initial solicitation to contract award typically runs 12 to 24 months. You need to be on the approved vendor list before you can bid, which requires demonstrated operational experience, which you do not have because you have not yet won a contract. This is not an oversight in the process. It is a feature. ICE detention operates through a different mechanism: intergovernmental service agreements, or IGSAs. where a county or municipal authority signs the primary contract with ICE and subcontracts facility management to a private operator. This pathway bypasses standard federal procurement timelines and allows ICE to expand detention capacity without congressional appropriations action. It is how the detention industry grew so rapidly after 2025 without requiring direct legislative authorization. At the state level, California, Illinois, New York, Nevada, and New Jersey have prohibited new private prison contracts or banned the practice outright. In states that still contract, a new operator needs American Correctional Association accreditation, state DOC approval on staffing ratios and programming, a competitive procurement win against operators with decades of incumbent relationships, and then a contract renewal cycle of 3 to 5 years with no performance-based guarantee of renewal. The single largest regulatory risk is none of the above. It is the executive branch. Biden's January 2021 executive order required no legislation, no public hearing, no regulatory comment period. By November 2022, 18 months later, the Bureau of Prisons had transferred every inmate out of privately operated federal facilities. An entire revenue segment gone without a product recall or a trial. Trump reversed that order in early 2025. The companies recovered. The lesson about what a single document can accomplish has not been incorporated into most financial models of this industry. The entry path that avoids both the construction cost and the worst of the procurement gauntlet is operating under an IGSA in a facility that already exists. On October 1st, 2025, CoreCivic announced that a new intergovernmental service agreement between ICE and the Oklahoma Department of Corrections had authorized CoreCivic to reopen and operate the Diamondback Correctional Facility in Watonga, Oklahoma, a 2,060-bed facility originally built in 1999. The facility had been idled, sitting maintained at minimum cost, empty, waiting. The reopening required no new construction, no new environmental permits, no multi-year competitive bid. An IGSA was signed. CoreCivic staffed the facility for ICE detainees. The asset was already there. They turned the lights back on. For a new entrant, the equivalent strategy is identifying an idle facility in a jurisdiction that needs revenue, negotiating a lease or operating agreement, and bringing it into compliance for a specific government customer. Capital requirement, a fraction of new construction. Timeline, months rather than years. The condition is that you need enough operational credibility to be trusted with the contract in the first place, which returns you directly to the experience catch-22 at the beginning. You need contracts to demonstrate experience. You need experience to win contracts. The smarter route is not faster. It is less expensive. That is a meaningful difference, but do not mistake it for easy. Natural agreed transition, leave blank the business model is simpler than most investors expect, which is part of why it produces so many consistent failures among operators who mistake simplicity for margin. Think of it as a hotel where the guests have no choice about checking in, no choice about checking out, and no ability to complain to anyone who can affect your revenue. The government sends you a daily rate per occupied bed. You pay your staff, your food contractor, your medical provider, your liability insurer. The difference is your business. At small scale, a 100-bed facility operating at a per diem rate in the range documented in recent U.S. Marshals Service contracts, approximately $70 per person per night, generates $7, zeros in per day at full occupancy. At 85% occupancy across 365 days, that is approximately $2.17 million in gross annual revenue. Staff a facility that size at a 1-to-8 guard ratio across 3 shifts, add food service, medical, and administrative overhead, and you are spending in the range of $1.7 to $1.9 million. Operating income, $270,000 to $470,000 annually on $2.17 million in revenue. That is not an investment. That is a job with a physical plant and an enormous insurance bill. Now apply institutional scale. GEO Group entered 2026 with approximately 26,000 ICE detention beds following its contract awards, plus capacity across state and federal criminal incarceration programs. Total 2025 revenue, $2.6 billion. Net income, $254 million, a roughly 9.8% margin, and a record year, driven almost entirely by ICE detention expansion. CoreCivic, $2.2 billion revenue, $116.5 million net income. The scale advantage is not operational complexity, it is fixed cost amortization. The compliance infrastructure, the executive layer, the reporting systems, these costs exist at 500 beds and at 50,000 beds. At 50,000 beds, they represent a fraction of a percent of revenue. At 500 beds, they can be the difference between profit and shutdown. The structural trap in this model is specific. Your customer and your regulator are the same entity. The same agency that signs your check has authority to audit your facility, modify your contract terms mid-cycle, reduce your inmate population without compensation if they don't have a bed guarantee clause, and cancel with standard notice. There is no adversarial negotiation of the kind that exists in private commerce. There is compliance or there is termination. The first major failure mode in this industry is financial engineering that runs ahead of the operational reality it was supposed to enhance. In 1983, a Nashville attorney named Thomas Beasley and a business executive named Dr. Robert Krantz Jr. co-founded Corrections Corporation of America. The idea was straightforward. Private operators could manage prisons more efficiently than government agencies. Within a decade, CCA had contracts across multiple states, a public listing on the New York Stock Exchange, and a reputation as the prototypical privatization success story. In 1997, Krantz engineered a restructuring. A company called Prison Realty Trust was spun off as a real estate investment trust, a REIT. REITs do not pay corporate income tax, provided they distribute at least 90% of their taxable income as dividends to shareholders. The plan: Prison Realty Trust would own the physical prison facilities and lease them back to CCA. CCA would pay rent. Taxable income would pass through to investors rather than the IRS. Shareholders would receive high dividend yields. The structure was widely described as creative. The problem was sequencing. Prison Realty Trust began funding speculative construction, building new facilities before government contracts were signed to fill them. When contracting agencies did not commit to the occupancy levels the revenue model required, the cash flow assumptions collapsed. Prison Realty Trust failed to meet its REIT dividend distribution requirements due to what the company publicly described as cash flow problems. The two entities combined reported losses of $265 million for the year, ended December 31, 1999. The stock dropped below $1 per share, triggering potential NYSE delisting. The company was in default on its debt. On December 27, 1999, Dr. R. Krantz resigned as chairman and CEO. His son D. Robert Krantz III stepped down as president the same day. Shareholder lawsuits alleged that corporate officers had concealed information and made materially false statements. Those suits were eventually settled for approximately $104 million in stock and cash. The REIT structure was dissolved. The two entities remerged under the CCA name in 2000, restructured their debt, and survived. Dr. Krantz later lost his Nashville estate in bankruptcy proceedings, stemming from personal guarantees tied to the collapse. The prison management business was profitable. The financial structure built around it was not. The innovation designed to make the business permanently advantaged, the tax-optimized REIT wrapper, was the mechanism that nearly killed it. The second failure mode is different. It is what happens when your profitability depends on the integrity of officials who simultaneously have the power to extract money from your competitors and direct volume toward you. In 2010, GEO Group acquired Cornell Companies, a corrections management firm. Cornell had operated the Walnut Grove Youth Correctional Facility in Mississippi since 2003, a 500-bed prison housing males between the ages of 13 and 22. GEO Group inherited the management contract. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation in October 2010. What investigators documented was filed in federal court, and described by the presiding judge in terms that require no editorial enhancement. The guard-to-inmate ratio at Walnut Grove was 1:60. DOJ investigators reported staff on inmate sexual misconduct they described as among the worst the division had encountered anywhere in the country. Guards held documented gang affiliations. Violence was severe enough to have caused brain damage in at least one documented case. Medical care was inadequate. Constitutional standards were violated across multiple categories simultaneously. The federal class action lawsuit settled in March 2012. U.S. District Court Judge Carlton Reeves wrote that conditions at the facility paint a picture of such horror as should be unrealized anywhere in the civilized world, and called it a cesspool of unconstitutional and inhuman acts. GEO Group and the state of Mississippi entered a court-supervised remediation agreement. Then the FBI arrived, not about the conditions, about the contracts that funded the operation. Operation Mississippi Hustle was a 5-year federal investigation into corruption between Mississippi State Corrections officials and private contractors. Its central figure was Christopher Epps, Commissioner of the Mississippi Department of Corrections, the official responsible for overseeing every private prison contract in the state, including Walnut Grove. Prosecutors established that Epps had accepted at least $1.4 million in bribes from Cecil McCrory, a businessman and former Republican member of the Mississippi State Legislature, and others. In exchange, Epps steered more than $800 million in state prison contracts towards specific private management companies. In February 2015, Epps pleaded guilty to bribery and filing a false income tax return. U.S. District Judge Henry Wingate called it the largest graft operation in the state of Mississippi and sentenced Epps to 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. McCrory was also convicted. Epps is now an inmate in the federal corrections system he spent his career overseeing. GEO Group was not charged in the investigation. What that fact does or does not imply about the broader relationship between private prison contract revenue and official conduct is not a question this script is going to resolve for you. 4 rules distill from both cases. 1. Never build before you have a contract. Prison Realty Trust's speculative construction nearly killed a company that was operationally sound. The physical facility has no value without a government occupancy commitment attached to it. The contract is the asset. The building is the liability. 2. Diversify your government customers across jurisdictions. One state contract is one point of failure. When Mississippi's private prison relationships collapsed under federal scrutiny after Walnut Grove, the revenue did not redistribute to surviving operators. It was eliminated. 3. Treat political risk as a line item, not a footnote. Biden's 2021 executive order was not unpredictable. The DOJ had been signaling skepticism about federal private prison contracts for years. Operators concentrated in Bureau of Prisons business had no cushion when the order arrived. The ones with ICE and state contract exposure did. 4. The person who signs your contracts is not your partner. Epps accepted $1.4 million and received 19 years and 7 months. McCrory, who paid him, was convicted. The corruption existed around contracts that GEO Group's predecessor was operating under legitimate agreements, or at least. That is what the record shows. Your business is only as clean as a procurement process you do not control. The single biggest existential threat to this business model is not a lawsuit, not an operational failure, and not a competitor. It is the day a decision maker in the executive branch concludes that private prisons are a political liability rather than a policy asset. Biden's January 2021 executive order required no legislation, no public hearing, no notice and comment period. It required a signature. 18 months later, the Bureau of Prisons had 0 inmates in privately operated facilities. An entire revenue segment eliminated without a trial, without a product recall, without any operational failure on the part of the companies involved. Trump reversed that order in early 2025. The ICE expansion that followed produced the record profits cited throughout this script. Then, In early 2026, reports emerged that ICE was considering restructuring its detention facility network. GEO Group stock fell 52%, not on an announcement, not on a policy change, on a report about what a federal agency might be considering. The global private prison market is projected to grow from $21.9 billion in 2025 to $32.8 billion by 2032, at a compound annual growth rate of 6.1%. That projection assumes no major policy shift in primary contracting jurisdictions. It assumes incarcerated and detained populations remain at roughly current levels. It assumes the political consensus around immigration enforcement and criminal incarceration does not reverse direction. Every one of those assumptions has already been proven wrong at least once within the preceding 10 years. The projection is accurate only if history stops repeating itself in this specific sector. Decide for yourself how likely that is. Time to pull it all together and answer the actual question. How much money do you actually make if you do this right? Scenario 1. Small management operator, 500-bed contract in a state that still authorizes private prison operations. Setup cost $5 million. At a per diem management fee of approximately $75 per occupied bed per day, within the range suggested by available U.S. Marshals and ICE contract data. At 85% occupancy, you generate approximately $11. $6 million in annual revenue. Staffing at a 1-to-8 ratio across 3 shifts plus food, medical, and administrative overhead runs approximately $9.8 million. Net annual income, approximately $1.8 million. Payback on the $5 million setup, 2.8 years, assuming the contract renews. If the state changes administrations and ends the program at the next legislative session, your company has no hard asset, no recurring revenue, and a staff requiring pay through a transition period. The business you spent 3 years building has a resale value close to zero. Scenario 2. Institutional scale acquisition. You purchased GEO Group at its early 2025 market cap of $4 billion, revenue $2.6 billion, net income at 2025 record margins $254 million, simple payback at that rate 15.7 years. GEO Group's net income in a pre-expansion year, before the 2025 ICE contract surge, was approximately $35 million. Verify pre-2025 GEO net income at that figure, payback is well over a century. The record margins are real. They arrived because of one administration's enforcement priorities, one agency's budget authorization, and one geopolitical moment producing volume. None of those are structural features of the business. They are conditions. At small scale, this works as a job, not an investment. At institutional scale, the returns depend on variables outside your control. The gap between those two scenarios cannot be closed by growing the business. It is the business. You started this wanting to buy a prison. What you are actually buying is a long-term bet that enforcement levels, contracting structures, and executive branch priorities will remain stable enough for long enough to return your capital. The two companies that dominate this market have survived REIT collapses, executive order wipeouts, state-level prohibitions, and federal court findings calling their facilities cesspools of unconstitutional acts. They are making record profits right now at this specific political moment under this specific administration's specific priorities. The official who ran the corrections system that contracted with these companies is currently serving nearly 20 years in the federal prison system he spent his career managing. Whether that is irony, justice, or just the math of this industry catching up, the market hasn't priced in an answer, and neither has this channel. Subscribe if you want to know what other exclusive assets actually cost. Not the listed price, the real one. Every week, one asset that sounds impossible to own, and the real cost of finding out you were